No one ever believed what had happened to my father, even after the famous YouTuber went missing for a week in the same stretch of woods. But Dad was the first to be taken. My father and I had decided to go camping to help celebrate his promotion at work. He was a seasoned camper, but I was relatively new to it all. We spent most of the day riding our dirt bikes through a few of the trails toward the bottom of the mountain. But when the sun started to set, we decided to make camp for the night. We set up our tents and I gathered some firewood with Dad. We got a pretty decent-sized fire burning before eating our dinner and toasting some marshmallows. When the sun had completely gone, I was genuinely afraid of how many stars there were. Being from the city meant I was only used to seeing a few stars in the night sky, but out there, away from civilization, it was as if I could see the entire galaxy, and it was unsettling. Furthermore, putting me on edge, the various sounds of nocturnal insects, buzzing and chirping. It was a lot louder than being back at home. There weren't any howling wolves, but there were the occasional owl hoot. The trees even groaned a little, swaying in the gentle breeze that blew them. Dad decided that it would be fun to tell a ghost story, and for one of the stories he had to act out one of the scenes. He stood beside a tree, but as he acted out the scene, I noticed something was carved into the bark. "What do you think that is?" I asked, standing and pointing at the symbols. He frowned a little, disappointed I wasn't very interested in his ghost story. He turned his attention to where I was pointing and continued to frown. "I'm not sure. I kind of noticed it before, but I guess my brain automatically assumed it was just one of those Jack loves Jane messages that kids like to carve in the trees." He leaned down a little bit and stood in a way that allowed the light from the fire to flicker off the tree. I followed suit. The symbols have been organised into a diamond pattern, carved a few inches deep into the bark. And it looks like a tool was used to carve this," Dad said, running his finger along the inside of one of the larger symbols. "It's extremely..." Dad jerked his hand back and sucked on the tip of his finger. He chuckled a little. Well, I was going to say smooth, but it cut me, so I guess I'm wrong. As Dad spoke his sentence, the insects stopped buzzing and chirping, the owls stopped hooting, and the gentle breeze that blew through the trees turned into a strong gust. The wind blew down some dust into both of our eyes, and we tried to clear them with the back of our hands. We went back to the fire and sat down, but Dad didn't stop rubbing his eyes. We didn't speak for a few minutes, but when Dad stopped rubbing and looked at me, I gasped, and almost scooted back. I can't see," he said, blinking a few more times. I used to do deliveries, not actually a truck driver though. I used to have this regular that was out in the boondocks, 25 miles out of the way of civilization and smack dab in the middle of two large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month, and would always pass it at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of houses on this route that were really broken down, and I never saw anyone around them in the 6 months of driving that route. Always assumed they were vacant because they didn't look livable. Well, I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon, had been driving for a very long time without seeing a single car drive towards me. Finally drive past the abandoned houses, and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter, but she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign that I was speeding or something and slowed down. I take a quick glance in my rearview mirror after passing her by, and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned 180 to do this. It was just very odd and definitely set off my spidey senses. I never saw her again or anyone else on that route by those houses in the 10 months that I drove it. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest stop for the next while. So no problem, the highway's completely deserted. So I pulled to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette as I stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell phone service. There isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was just a deer. But nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive, ready to peel out. But for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window open and I ask, "What's up?" He replies to me in a very, very serious tone. "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to kill himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was going to use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrive. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and I wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. I pulled into a Purdue plant to drop my trailer off and go park where they allow bobtails to sit, right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I do PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 a.m, I heard something tapping on my passenger side door. I get up and look out the window expecting to see someone, maybe a driver asking for a lumper check, but no one's there. Maybe I'm hearing things, so I go and lay back down. As soon as my head hits the pillow, I hear the tapping again, except this time it's on my driver's side door. Same thing as before, I jump up and look out my window, but there's nothing there. Double lock my doors just in case, and open my side hatches so I can hear what's going on outside. After about 15 minutes, I hear a very light splat, 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 going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up, planning to look out of my window at the exact same moment whoever it is knocks on the window again. And then I hear a thud coming from the roof of the cab. I stop, grab my tyre thumper off its hook, and ready myself for whatever the hell is going on. Then, a freaking goose falls off the top of the truck and lands on my hood. It stands up, waddles back and forth, and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again. I say screw it and open the door, and there's another damn goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old that just found the horn on his new bike. The pond that I parked next to had a ton of them just dicking about. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple of minutes the damn geese would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle around. Driving through rural New Mexico, Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining cats and dogs, just pouring so hard you can barely see out of the windscreen, going 20 miles an hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. It was just a nasty storm. I came around a corner and the whole countryside legit was on fire, like 20-foot tall flames, hundreds of yards in all directions, while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. I just slowly drove on. It was totally freaky and unsurreal. Honestly, I thought I may be hallucinating. I checked the news and it turned out it was a propane tank that slid off the road because it was going too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently, then lit on fire. I never saw the truck. It must have been hidden behind something. I felt a bit bad for not stopping. The Holodomor, also known as the Terror Famine or the Great Famine, was a man-made famine, a genocide created by Joseph Stalin in Soviet Ukraine from 1932 to 1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians. The Holodomor was part of the wider Soviet famine of 1932 to 1933, which affected the major grain-producing areas of the Soviet Union. Stalin took measures to destroy the Ukrainian peasantry and the Ukrainian intellectual and cultural elites to prevent them from seeking independence for Ukraine. Here are some true survivor stories, and viewer discretion is advised. I lived in Cherkasy, a city in central Ukraine. At my school, the teachers would tell us to keep our ears and eyes open and listen when we were at home, and then tell us to come to school and tell them what our parents had been saying, so our parents tried not to talk in front of their children. I remember it as if it was today. My mother brought home a small boy and a girl younger than me, and I heard as she asked them where their mother was. They said that their mother had brought them and left them on the street. It was already late in the evening, so my mother brought them home and fed them, and then in the morning she took them to the orphanage. The children were severely underweight and malnourished. The children's mother saw that herself she was dying and decided to leave the children in the streets. and hope that someone would take them, because one had to be inhumane not to help two small children. Often my mother would warn me that if we ever told anyone what my parents were saying, they would take her away, and I'd be put in an orphanage. So I kept quiet because I was scared. People lived in fear, always, and this did not change until the war. Us children would go searching for food. We heard that there was a huge mound of grain at the train station, so we all ran over to the grain, but the entire mound of grain had been covered in gasoline so that people couldn't take it. And this is a fact, you know. This is not a story. Nobody told me about this. I saw this myself as a small child, and people who would go and collect the grain stalks would be arrested. My family and I lived in Odessa during the famine. There was a store called a torgovlia, or a store for foreigners, where only gold and precious metals or foreign currency could be used, and during the famine these stores were a means for the Soviet government to augment their gold reserves. Desperate starving people could trade gold or other family heirlooms for usually very small amounts of grain or other foodstuffs. One day my mother said, "I have to take your ring and earrings and take it to the shop to trade." I started to cry, saying, "These were from my godmother. Why are you taking them from me?" My mother said, "Because we don't have any money and there's a famine. You can't buy anything for money, only for gold and silver." So mother took the earrings and ring, and they weighed them down at the shop, and in exchange they gave her rice or butter or whatever she needed. I once went out into the street, and my parents got so angry with me, and they told me not to go into the street because children are being stolen. Later we found out that children were being stolen and ground into schnitzel and pies. People from the bazaar had said that when a policeman was eating a pie, he found a piece of nail and a finger in it. One day my mother told me that I could go to my Aunt Tanya's house, but to be careful and not to talk to anyone. We lived at number 2 and my auntie lived at number 10, so I had to go quickly, but by the time I got to number 7, a man started to talk to me, and he tried to grab me by the arm. Somehow I got away from him, and when I looked at his face, his eyes, they looked as if they were made from glass. I had heard that people who ate human flesh turned into animals. You know, they get this kind of look in their eye. And the man said that if I told anyone, he would find me and kill me and my entire family. I was very, very scared. I lived in Ivanivka village when so-called forced collectivization came. At first, everyone was encouraged to join the kolkhozy, collective farms, but those who did not want to join were told that as long as they fulfilled the quotas imposed by the government, that they can then stay as individual farmers. And so, at first, many believed because the authorities had told them that as long as you fulfill your obligation to the government, then all the rest is yours. It simply means that they had to submit so much wheat and so much potatoes, meat, pigs, poultry, cows, and whatever is left will be more than enough for them to stay alive. But that was at the beginning. So in 1931, the quotas were increased to the point that if you fulfill the quota of submitting whatever you had, the produce, wheat, etc., then there wasn't much left for the families to live on. When the people had fulfilled the first quotas, compulsory quotas, the government imposed the second quotas in a matter of 2 or 3 months, which the people and the Kalops were unable to fulfill. They just didn't have enough. That was considered to be counter-revolution. They assumed that the people still had enough food to fulfill the second quotas. Well, since people were not fulfilling, the government formed so-called brigades. They used to call them the 25,000s, that were trained and armed and sent to the villages, including ours, and I'm only talking about my village, that were going to every house searching for anything that was edible and just simply taking it. Those who protested, well, they were beaten up, and quite often to death. Those who protested even more, they were simply shot in front of their own children and their wives and their mothers, and so on. The people were dying on the streets and in their homes, in their houses, because of the lack of food. It is understandable that at that age I was only 7 or 8, and I could not comprehend for the true reasons why the government would take our food from people, so that they would be dying, but no one was willing to explain it to me, and because to talk about the holod or famine was against the law. My parents couldn't explain to me then because they were just simply afraid that if they did and I could start talking somewhere, that they would be in trouble. And so when the terrible conditions came, that's in December and January, and the worst one was in February of 1933, there were a lot of people that have died. Every morning The wagon, a corpse wagon, would come and stop at every house and start shouting, "Has anybody died overnight?" I lived in Kovalivka village. The famine was terrible. I was about 7 years old. My youngest brother died because he was too young to save himself. I went to the grain depots and I ate the grains a few times. That's how I survived. Those who couldn't do this died. Many died. We weren't allowed to collect grains, but we still did it. We'd hop over the road and go into the depot. When I went to school, very few children went during the famine. Usually they were just too weak from the famine. We didn't eat at school. No, they didn't give us anything to eat. There was nothing to eat at school. Many people died in our village from starvation. The village wasn't close to any city. It was about 120 kilometers to Kiev, and it wasn't easy to walk there. The famine was just terrible. Many people died, very many, perhaps half my village. But what can you do? It's frightening to even think about it. The famine was just terrible, and I don't want to remember it anymore. It was very hard to live through that famine. The famine subsided only after the 1933 harvest had been completed. The traditional Ukrainian villages had all been essentially destroyed, and settlers from Russia were brought in to repopulate the devastated countryside. According to a recent demographic study, 13.3% of Ukraine's population died at the time of the Holodomor. It is estimated that the famine-related losses in Ukraine during 1932 to 1933 stand at 3.9 million of direct losses and 600,000 unborn children. This all happened within the last 2 to 3 hours. My mum and I have been trying to catch the ice cream truck all summer, as they have certain ice cream bars that you really can't get anywhere else around here. We were in the middle of watching a show when we suddenly heard the ice cream truck outside. It was loud, signifying that it was close. I got up and went to the door. I saw that it was in front of our house and began to say that, it's too late, but then I realised it was slowing down, not driving away. Now, this wasn't an, there's someone coming, I should stop, slow down. It was a, I've been slowing down to a stop since before you opened the door, kind of slow down. My mum told me to go out and make sure he didn't drive away. It was odd, as it was around 9 p.m, but we just wanted our ice cream. My mum came outside and we ordered. The guy was quiet, but said that he stopped because he heard voices. Now, no one was outside, and we were inside when we were talking. There was an open garage door a few houses down, but no one was there. He was able to find the flavour I had asked for, but had some trouble finding the one my mum asked for. I just saw it. I just ate one. I figured that he was new to the job and just nervous, so I thought nothing of it. We paid and went back inside. Once we got inside, however, I noticed that mine had been opened. I asked my mum if she had opened it, as she was the one who had both the treats. She said no. She offered me hers, as we both knew neither of us wanted to eat an opened ice cream bar, when she noticed that hers was really puffed up. 9 p.m. The music suddenly turned on when we both heard it. It didn't slowly fade in as if it had been on the whole time. It slowed to a stop in front of our house before I even opened the door. He was quiet and gave us 2 suspicious ice cream bars. He sped away after that, not stopping for anyone else. Just 15 minutes ago, I called my mum in from the garage to tell her that the cats were trying to catch this bug that looked like a wasp or something. As she came in, she saw something through the kitchen window. She rushed me to the front door in the next room, and when she opened it, a different car drove away. I didn't see the full thing, but she says it was pulled over with the lights on and quickly peeled out of there when we opened the door. My dad just came home and we told him about everything, and he thinks it's odd, but that's about it. Sure, the 2 incidents could be totally innocent, coincidental, but it's just too weird. Creepy people that we saw tonight, let's not meet again. A couple of years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to work a job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had with that was he did not want to fly with his dogs when they made the move, since they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit reluctant to fly them out due to health concerns for both pets. By the time he had located a home to rent, he was missing his furry little buddies and made the request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to LA to him. Now, we are Chicago folk, so the trip would be a long one. However, with the three of us to foot, the nearly 30-hour drive, it would probably be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we'd needed to, we'd let our friend's sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often past an 8-hour stay at a Denver La Quinta Inn. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving for 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. Whoops. From that point on, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without much trouble until we entered California in need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day and tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I remained shotgun as the navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. We kept our eyes peeled for road signs until we discovered a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, or something along those lines, which had a mobile station. How wonderful. It was convenient too, as it was located almost directly off of the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes when we approached the pumps. Normally we let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before then, and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back, I decided to pump gas without anyone having to leave the vehicle. My buddy driving had pulled us up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan with a short, plump gentleman who just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other Humpties at the pump, all unoccupied, and there were a couple of other cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees, so nothing really seemed out of the ordinary until I swiped my credit card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt, which I chalked up to a misread. I swiped again, and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed, but we needed gas, so I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing, and asked if anyone needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked into the store and made a mental note of how strange this gas station was. Kind of quiet, especially for one right off the interstate, but that's no matter. As I walked through, more weirdness. First thing I noticed is that there were some boxes of chips left on the floor, like someone was stocking shelves and just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that immediately there was no one milling around the place. With the 6 cars beside my own out there, I felt like I would see someone. Things just got even weirder when I realised that there was no one behind the counter. No customers, no workers. And then it dawned on me. What had happened to the gentleman who was at the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is where I begin to feel this gnawing sensation in my stomach. Something isn't right. I have always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to just get the hell out. I wanted to run, but I held back. I would look suspicious booking it out of a gas station that was empty, and decided to just play it cool, natural. Don't let your body language let on how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably inside of this gas station for only a couple of minutes when I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound. But no, nothing. As I exit the shop and see my car, I begin to feel dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes down and strikes him down. I am about 25 yards from the car when I see this gentleman come out from around the side of the shop opposite me. This is not the same man I saw pumping gas. He was larger, and he had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I could describe it is like Nick Cage's smile from the movie Face Off. I continued walking to my car, but when I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me with a purpose. At this point, I noped my way back to the car with an increased urgency in my step. And of course, my friend has the door to the car locked like a complete douche clown. There is also now a 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions did not notice how freaked out I was, or the creepy gentleman still walking in my direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the freaking doors, to which he only half rolls down the window to tell me that the dog was in my seat and they were afraid she'd jump out the door when I opened it. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could, while my friend is now just realising how freaked out I am. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and see Nick Cage has stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly creeping out my friends with the story, as I pumped gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that same gas station again. It's been about 15 minutes since we pulled out initially, and we all go silent as we notice that those very same cars are still sitting in the same spots where we had left them. After thoroughly freaking out for a few miles, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me, and was as entirely creeped out by the situation as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great vacation, but it still bothers me as to what the hell was going on in this little gas station off the highway, and what the hell was that smiling man's story. So, crazy smiling man and whoever else was lying in wait at Yermo Ghost Town exit mobile station, let's not meet.